Hi, my name is Emma Harris, and I'm going to talk about the 3 golden rules of open science training. So I'm part of a project called Orion Open Science, which is Horizon 2020 funded project made up of 6 core partners, a consortium across Europe, as you can see on the map. And the aim of the project is very simple: to promote open science in RFPOs, so research funding and performing organizations. And the way that the Orion project does this is to do activities such as public dialogues and co-creation experiments, and also things like art science projects, citizen science projects. We also have a podcast, and we do online and offline training, which will be the subject of what I'm talking about today. So the underlying ethos is to put more science into society and more society into science. So I am part of a team for Work Package 4, which is based at the Max Delbruck Center for Molecular Medicine, the MDC in Berlin. And here you can see myself with my colleague Zoe and Louisa Bengtson, who is the Work Package leader. And we are responsible for the open science training and the podcast. So what need is there for open science training? Well, my colleague Zoe Ingram, she did a training analysis, training program analysis in 2018. And she looked at research institutions in the EU Life Alliance. Now this is flagship biomedical institutes in 13 European countries. And she accessed either publicly available data or data that was reported to her directly. And she analyzed 207 training programs, and to see how many of them had anything to do with open science, either directly or one of the aspects of open science. And as you can see from the graph, the vast majority had no open science aspect. So out of 207, 20 had anything to do with open science. And that included things like public engagement and outreach, open access, lab notebooks, open data, and open science itself. And if we break that down, we can see that out of those 20, the majority was in the CRG, which is an Orion partner, the Center for Genomic Regulation in Barcelona. And they were previously, until recently, part of the FOSTER project, which is another open science initiative, a European project. So that may have influenced that. Now, this was obviously for 2018, and the figures may they will look different now, but I think the key thing to kind of understand here is that there is definitely a gap. There's definitely a need for open science training. So how have we, as part of the Orion project, been trying to fill that gap? Well, we've done face-to-face workshops. We've done 9 Orion half or full day training workshops where we've sort of gone in and organized it. And also we've been part of 23 conferences, seminars, and other events, sort of say PhD retreats and so forth, where we'll come for a couple of hours and do a short workshop. This has covered 13 countries in Europe, and you can just see just at the very bottom there was also we went to Israel as well. So we've also done 3 webinars, which is I'm including in face-to-face workshops simply because it just differentiates them from the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course, the online training that we have also created. So we've definitely tried to, make sure that there is open science training across Europe. So what have we learned from these things? Well, these were the 3 golden rules come in. So the first golden rule is focusing on professional benefits. And the first thing I'd like to say is ideology is not enough. And what I mean by that is open science is good science. Yeah, we can agree on that, definitely. But that in it of itself is not enough to convince researchers. there is an administrative burden, there is a lack of confidence, there are institutional barriers. So focusing on ideology is, in my opinion, not a great start. Also, a lot of people who are attending an open science training, it's the opposite problem. They may well be already on board with the principles and the ideology of open science, in which case, again, you want to focus on the professional benefits. So I always try and communicate some concrete benefits. And we talk about things like increased citations, raised profile, greater access to data, improved collaborations, and better chances of funding, among other things. So obviously, when we do a workshop, we go into these in more detail, but these are just some of the things to highlight for you to get an idea of what I'm talking about. So this, if you like, is the why. And then the how is tools and resources. So things like Unpaywall, Zenodo, Science Matters, Jupyter Notebooks, ORCID or ORCID, Re3Data, and preprint. These often come up, and obviously there are many others. And as I'm going to say in a few slides, it depends on the kind of questions you get and the kind of participants you have, what tools you might want to highlight, what you want to talk about. So just to illustrate that the interest is in these practical elements of open science, I just want to show you something. Now, I haven't got a big sort of Twitter presence or whatever it's called, but this was the tweet I did that had the most amount of impressions and interactions and so forth. Basically, I did a Wikipedia Diversathon, which just basically creating more articles on female scientists. And while I was there, I learned more about how you actually edit Wikipedia and so forth. And I discovered that if you create an account and then work on their sandbox, you can just put in a book title or a URL or a DOI, and it generates a reference. I've since been told that there are other software that does this. I was very excited about this, and I shared it on Twitter, as you can see. And, you know, this is the thing, more than anything that I've ever shared about open science principles, that got people retweeting and interacting. So I think just as a little bit of evidence of what I'm saying, that's just an example. And then the other thing is kind of revealing the realities of the academic system. So you say these things and your participants may sort of say, okay, well, these all sound great, but I need to focus on the impact factor. And what can be quite useful then is to talk about you know, the problems with the impact factor, and how it's gamed and how it doesn't really have anything to do with the quality of research anymore. So it's balancing those two things. Concrete benefit, professional benefit, what's it going to do on a day-to-day basis for your participants, and also maybe drawing the curtain back a little bit on the things that they think are important, but actually aren't so much, perhaps, or are flawed then. Okay, so that's the first one. Second one, very simple, encouraging peer-to-peer learning. I say it's simple, it did actually take me a little while to really understand the importance of this. Now, most participants have an uneven knowledge. And what I mean by that is some participants will have done science communication. They may have volunteered at science festivals. They may have a blog, YouTube channel, whatever. And some may be really clued up on making their data open. Others always use preprint, always publish open access. They generally won't be the same people sometimes, and then they become almost like a second facilitator, which is great. But they usually, there are sort of these pockets of knowledge. And what's really good is if you can get the participants teaching each other. And you can do this just by asking open questions. So has anyone published a preprint? Or has anyone made their data open? Has anyone talked at a science festival? These kind of things, just opening up the room and allowing people to talk about their experiences. And I mean, I haven't got any references for this, but I mean, I think a lot of people who do training will agree, people tend to learn better when their peers are telling them something rather than the trainer kind of doing this top-down approach. And it brings a sense of community in the space, you know? So also participants can often teach you things that you didn't know about. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what this brainstorming thing is, you can see in the second photograph. But we have all very much benefited from talking to our participants and allowing our participants to tell us what they do in terms of open science. So that's the second rule, encouraging peer-to-peer learning. The third one is emphasizing concrete but achievable next steps. And this breaks down into two kind of aspects. The first is that it's easy for participants to get overwhelmed. You know, they'll say, I can't do all this. I can't make these change everything. I'm not in a position to. I mean, especially if your participants are PhD researchers, they don't have a lot of power. It's up to their PI a lot of the time, particularly in the life sciences, which is where the Orion project is aimed, though we've had a very diverse number of disciplines attend our workshops, or participants from a diverse number of disciplines attend our workshops. But yeah, it's very much that the PI makes the decisions and PhD researchers don't have a lot of power. So they can be concerned about not being able to make these big changes. And what we always say is, if everyone makes a small step, then together we create a big culture shift. So that's the sort of the problem. And then one of the solutions to this is to get them to have a commitment. So you encourage a commitment. And we do this by having something called individual action plans. And these we do at the end. And the participants write down what they're going to do for open science in 1 week, 1 month, and 1 year. And then we take a photograph of all of them, and they're included in the participant pack with other resources that the participants get emailed after the session. And my colleague Zoe Ingram also did some analysis on this, and you can see here that by far and away the action that is most common is to further educate myself on open science. And I think that reveals that you know, this is often about planting the seeds and hoping that they blossom into people moving forward and discovering and exploring open science tools and actions. Publishing open access was also quite common. And just talking about open science, which is important in and of itself. It normalizes open science as a practice. So how does this actually look like in a typical Orion training workshop? How do we actually implement this? Okay, so we generally start with what we call a question board. And for this, we ask, what's your definition of open science? What is the one question you want answered by the end of the day? And what is your motivation for attending today? Now, the definition is really useful because it tells us what areas of open science people are most comfortable and familiar with, and what level we need to pitch the session at in terms of previous knowledge about open science. The questions are really great because at the end of the workshop, you can go back and read them all and make sure every participant leaves with the knowledge that they wanted. And the motivation, again, it links to the definition. You want to know why they're there. If everyone's there to learn more about open access, there's no point spending a lot of time on, say, science communication. Obviously you want to spend some time on it, but if that's really what they're hungry for, then you need to facilitate that because there is more chance that they'll then go and implement it. We have a card activity, so we have 2 sets of cards that we mix together. They're produced by Foster, one of them, the ones you can see in the pictures, and also HERE, which is an RRI in higher education project. And basically they all have statements on them. And the statements are things like open science training should be mandatory, or the public can't understand science and therefore shouldn't have any say in it. Sort of, you know, quite provocative statement. Everybody gets a card. They read the card, they think, they reflect, do I agree with this? Why or why not? Then they partner up and they discuss with their partner their thoughts on the card, and their partner does the same with them. And then everyone swaps. They swap partners, they don't swap cards. It's important to tell people that, because there's sometimes a little bit of confusion. But this is a great activity. It's very great, very good as an icebreaker, works in all nationalities and all levels, you know, funders, PhD students, everything in between. So we also do something called brain walking, which you can see in the bottom two pictures there. And that's where you have 3 flip charts spread throughout the room. And what we do for this is we write open access, open data, and science communication. You generally want to do this towards the end of the workshop. But essentially what you do is you have everyone walk around with a marker, and you do this in silence. That's important. And they write anything they've learned during the session so far, or anything that they already knew on the flip chart. And then they go on to the next one, and they keep going around. And obviously what happens is it's brainstorming. So someone writes something and somebody thinks, oh, I know what I could add, and so on and so forth. What this is good for is, one, you have a written record of people's ideas, and you can then go through it with them and say, oh, I hadn't heard of this, what's this, or so on, and you can actually learn more about what tools or ideas are available. Also, it's good if people are a bit quieter, a bit more introverted, and they maybe don't want to speak in the workshop, but they do have things to share. So that's a really, really nice technique to use, really nice training method to use. Case studies, so we have these, everything I'm talking about is available online. I'll come to that at the end. But yeah, we have some case studies, and you can obviously adapt them or write your own according to what you're doing. These can be useful if you've got quite a reticent group. So we had a session with some first-year PhD students, and they obviously didn't have a lot of experience in research. And this was really useful for them to frame their ideas. We also do role-playing exercise where you put the participants in groups of 3, and you have one, well, it can be 4, 3 or 4, and you have one bad guy, and the bad guy is against open science, hates open science, wants to stop any open science practices. And, you know, it's quite funny because the researchers will always choose a PI, and the project managers, the research support staff, and the funders will all usually or almost always choose a director or a kind of a head of institution. But what's nice about that is that the participants can kind of say the things that maybe they've been thinking a little bit but didn't want to sort of say to your face. And also they get to argue for open science. And it's funny, when you start having to put something in your own words, you start to internalize it a lot more. Also, it's a really fun exercise. And I tell, and you know, me and my colleagues always tell the participants, have fun with it, kind of go a little bit over the top with it. And yeah, it's a quite energetic, fun thing to do. So maybe, you know, if you want to do it after lunch or whatever, to kind of bring the energy in the room back up. It's a really nice method. We also have something very important called Meet the Expert. Now, this is because we do training in countries and institutions that aren't our own, but we have an expert come in and give a sort of 10, 20-minute talk and answer some questions. This could be, say, library staff to talk about the open access, you know, funding or processes in that institute. It could be someone who understands about copyright and licensing and tech transfer. And some researchers have requested senior scientists who practice open science in their research. And we've done that a couple of times, and that seems to have worked really well as well. We also give I do when I'm doing the workshops, we give a presentation to ensure everybody leaves with a baseline knowledge of open science, but we try and make that quite open. And like I said, with the peer-to-peer learning, you know, ask questions, don't kind of just lecture. And then the individual action plans, which I think we've covered. We also, as I said, created an online course, which is run twice, and it's going to be made self-paced and freely available. Well, it was always free, but you know, it's self-paced and CC BY. And what we did there was we had a forum so the participants could interact with us and each other, and group activities that they kind of had to do as a cohort. If anyone wants to ask me more about the MOOC, I'm quite happy to take questions. The contact details are at the end of this presentation. So I said about everything being online. So we have a Zenodo collection. The link is here, and we've got things like fact sheets and the checklists and you know, all sorts of things. So you can check that out. And yeah, if something is not there that I mentioned, just drop us an email. So the email address is on the screen, orion@mdc-berlin.de. And yeah, feel free to get in touch with us. Thank you very much for listening.